Hi, my name is Kathy. I'm an artist and a teacher, and sometimes I think I have the luckiest job in the world. I come to work every day here in my studio. This is where I make my paintings, and I've done a lot of work over the years in watercolor. Today, I'd like to share some of the tricks and tips I've learned with you. Now, when I say watercolor, you're probably thinking of something that looks like this: a plastic case with hard cakes of color inside. And that's exactly what we'll be using today. There are some other materials you should gather that will make your painting experience successful. By making a color chart. You'll be drawing some lines on a piece of watercolor paper, and I'll show you how. So here's our set of watercolors, and this has 8 total colors in it, but the 2 colors on the end we're not going to use because the 2 colors on the end are black and brown, and today we only want to use the colors of the rainbow. So I'm putting a little piece of tape over my black and my brown to remind me we're not using them today. So, how this works. First of all, look over here at my brush. I swish my brush around in the water, tap twice to get the extra water out, and now I come over to my paints, and I'm going to start with yellow. Now these paints are dry. They're dry cakes of color. So I'm going to swirl around in my yellow a little bit, and then I'm going to come down here to one of the boxes I just drew, and I'm going to paint that box yellow. This color is orange. I'm going to go around in the orange a few times, and now if you look closely, I'm going to leave a little bit of white space between the yellow and the orange so the 2 colors don't run into each other. The blue tape, my tape's about 1 inch wide, and we tape down. If you pull back and look, you'll see 2 pieces of watercolor paper on my board. This is my foam core board that I've taped it down to. There's about 1/2 inch of tape on the paper and 1/2 inch of tape on the board, all the way around. This is a scribble painting. You're going to do 1 continuous line, 1 big loopy scribble, maybe a few angles, whatever you feel like, in and out of the painting. I'm going to start with my sun colors, and I call yellow, orange, and red my sun colors. And I'm going to find the enclosed shapes that I made by making this scribble. And I'm just going to lay in some color and fill in the shape. Let's do another yellow one somewhere. How about here? So you take your sun colors, your red, your orange, and your yellow. Take a little water, tap. Now I'm going over to orange. I'm going to make this one orange. We are painting wet on dry. That is, we're putting wet paint on dry paper. Later, we're going to paint wet on wet paper, and you'll see the difference. Okay? So you go through your scribble and you find all your smaller shapes and fill them with sun colors. I'm going to go do that, and I'll check back with you shortly. So now I've painted my sun colors, orange, red, and yellow, in as many shapes as I could that aren't touching each other or aren't right next to each other. Because if I paint two wet shapes together, the colors are going to run right into each other. So paint as many shapes and sun colors as you can that aren't touching other shapes and let it dry. So as you can see, we're starting to fill in with our shade colors. And this is a great chance to try out all those different brushes too. All right, let's see, I'm gonna get some green in here. So this particular brush is a flat wash brush. And it's nice for filling in these spots. So these colors have been soaking for a couple of hours. They're very wet. Now we're gonna take the squares that we did earlier, and we're gonna paint the exact same color, but using this thick, wet paint. We're still painting wet on dry. We're gonna paint color below color. So right now, for example, I'm painting orange below orange, and I'm still leaving a little bit of white in between the colors. Color charts are really helpful because they help us see and remember what we've learned. In this row that we painted first, the colors whisper. And in this row that we painted with paint that had soaked for a couple of hours or even overnight, the colors are more saturated, they're richer. These colors shout. Sometimes in a painting you want a color that whispers, and sometimes you want a color that shouts. So we drew these 3 circles on our color chart so that we could practice painting wet in wet. I'm putting clear water, just plain, clean, clear water on the inside of this shape, this circle. And I'll get some paint that's been soaking for a couple of hours, and you just touch the paint to the water. And the water does all the work of the painting for you. And you get these beautiful, washy, watercolory effects as the paint charges across the paper surface. The water is the vehicle that takes the paint, the little pigments in the paint. It'll take it everywhere you painted the clean water. So that's why you want to paint carefully with the clean water. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to get a little yellow because I like to add a little second color to these things. And orange is made up from red and yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And then I'm actually going to tilt the paper a little bit and help the water move around. Okay, we're going to do this shape. I'm painting it with plain water. So once you get the plain water in, you can't get distracted. You've got to put the color in right away. And this is the soaked color that's been sitting in water. So it's very thick. I'm just touching it. Look at that. Look how the water does all the work of painting for you. We're just going to touch the brush along the inside line of the shape. So I'm going to hold off using the hairdryer to dry this wet in wet painting because it's so wet that if I turn on the hairdryer, it's going to blow the water right outside the outline of the shape. The best way to dry this is to pick up the board and take it outside and let it sit in the sun for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I want to show you one more thing before we go dry this. If you look closely, this is as many shapes as I could paint that were freestanding shapes. I have to let these dry before I paint any shape next to them, because if I were to paint any of these shapes next to these colors, the colors would run together. Until these dry, we can't paint any more shapes. Hey, this was fun. I'm so glad you could join me today. This scribble painting is a great way to teach yourself watercolor without worrying so much about drawing. And isn't it amazing that these two paintings came from the same set of paints? It's that wet in wet watercolor technique. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.